Very highly defendable. And that was very important because of my belief and the belief of many other people that I have great respect for, that the world is going through I'll call it a meltdown. Once the people found out what had been done to them by their representatives, they felt that it would be much better for their health and safety to be somewhere else. My understanding, it was the third ever closed session of Congress. We found that no matter where the politician was and what committee he was on, when top secret things were talked about, they wanted to close the session early so they could get out and put their tips out to the news. So we don't have any confidentiality in that, so it leaked out, I'm sure.
Am I right in assuming that you wouldn't contradict those leaks?
I wouldn't contradict them at all.
Thank you. This is Bill Ryan and Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot, and this is Monday, June the 29th. And this is a Project Camelot interview with a difference, because not only have I flown the best part of 8,000 miles, at least it feels like it, if it's not quite that many, from Europe to be here for the weekend, but we are also here with David Wilcock, who's also flown to Los Angeles here for the weekend to join us in a meeting that we had with Dr. Pete Peterson, who's a name that not many people will know, but maybe among the many extraordinary whistleblowers and contacts and researchers and scientists who we have had the great pleasure of talking to, maybe one of the most important. And yesterday we were talking off record for the best part of 12 hours, and our minds are still digesting an enormous amount of extraordinary information that he shared with us, some of which is off record, and as much as possible, Pete is willing to put on record here on camera because you feel, don't you, Pete, that there is profound and important reason why the sort of people who will be watching this video need to hear what it is that you have to say. We want to salute you because you're a very brave man. And one of the things we want to ask you, straight off the cuff, is why is it that you feel that you wanted to put some of your almost unbelievable and very important testimony on camera for a lot of people to listen to and watch and understand at this time? Why is it that you've come forward and you're talking to us now?
Well, I think the main reason for that is that I've had a inside insight for many, many years, having been picked up in various programs to do things for the government since I was 13 years old. And being a problem solver, I wish I could say that it was hard work and so forth, but I come from a long line of inventors on both sides of my family tree, and people who graduated from school very early, and were significant in affecting things that affected humanity, a number of them in virtually every kind of field and climate. And I see that the world seems to have gone downhill. I'm aware of many programs to remove intelligence from people and return the people, at least of this nation, to a mediocre status. We've watched the school systems deteriorate. We've watched the, as my wife likes to say, the program in the school systems, No Child Left with a Mind. And that's her paraphrase for it. And I've seen that the type of government we have, though I'm a patriot and very crudely use the phrase that I got the flag tattooed on both cheeks of my fanny the hard way. I spent 10 years in the Marine Corps, and a great part of that was in combat and combat zones, and other things I did for the government, and like to think I am unique in that I was probably shot at on most continents. And anyway, what I see happening is a complete turn away from the way this country started out and in its constitution to what appears to be headed toward a socialistic system where reason and logic has no bearing, and it concerns me, and I have no idea if my voice can help. I have no idea if that can, but I know that my ideas, I have inventions that have proven to be very helpful to society, and many of them have been suppressed by the fact that we had a government that was run by industry rather than by the people. And it's turned away from that, and many industries are actually governed by rules and regulations that make it virtually impossible for them to exist if they do things that are good for humanity. Mm-hmm. For example, we've had numerous things that happened in the industry of alternative power that were very inexpensive, very capable, but what we do is we've, through their own legislation, limited the power companies to being able to charge a certain amount over and above their costs. So when their costs went down, their profit went down, and they couldn't economically operate.
What I would love to ask you about, Pete, before we go into some of the stories that you have to tell, and we have good reason to believe that, having spent the best part of 12 hours yesterday talking about a tiny fraction of your experience, I think that we could probably talk literally for days. And what the people watching this video are really concerned about, I think, is what can you help them understand better than they do at the moment about what's really happening on this planet at the moment? What are the agendas of the controllers? How much trouble are we in, and what can people do? And I want to put that question on hold because this is the purpose of this video as far as we're concerned. And there's a whole separate topic, which is a technological topic, because this man we're talking to now has told us about technology that we didn't know existed. And my brain is still reeling over a conversation that we had at breakfast this morning, about which I'm going to say nothing. Now, before we start all of that, and that was a wonderful overview that you gave about your intentions, can you give us a little bit of a timeline of your career history, which started when you were very young? A little bit about the kind of things you've been involved in. We're not asking you to name names, but we just want to present you as somebody who people can get some kind of an idea of who this person is that we're talking to, whose name they haven't heard before.
Well, I can do that. Very interesting thing we were talking about. I have no idea where these thoughts came to me, but I know that very early on in life, I was so different from the people around me that I thought that probably I fell from the sky in a titanium egg and landed in my grandfather's orchard, and my parents found me there.
And I think you're probably right, actually, having talked to you for 2 days.
And until I was about 22, I actually believed that.
He is real. He's solid.
He's real, huh?
Then I quit believing that when I was in my mid-20s, and in my last few years, I'm nearly 70, and in my last few years I've started believing that again. Because I find that the people I'm stuck with here on this little spaceship Earth don't seem to have the same
view.
The same view of anything. And it may be that I'm just wacky, but my wackiness has made a lot of products and made a lot of sense to a number of people throughout my life. When, for some reason, probably genetics, because I have on both of my parents' sides, I have long lines of geniuses that extend back in history. And I grew up in a home that was entirely powered and heated and cooled in a very temperate climate, was powered by the sun and by atmospheric pressure change. It was a home that had a gallery inside of it, much like Mexican haciendas, but was covered, where we grew all of our meat products in the form of chickens and rabbits and such, and where we grew all of our food products.
So you had an interesting and unusual upbringing.
Had an interesting and unusual upbringing, and we drove in cars that my father made and invented, and we lived in homes that my father built out of strange materials that were very highly insulated. My dad was a pioneer in tilt-up concrete buildings, and was an engineer for the military when in my youth through Second World War.
And you were handpicked and chosen for a special program when you were as young as 13. Is this right?
Yes, I distinguished myself at age 10 by building a number of rockets that held altitude records, world altitude records, and by inventing a material that's used even today to power solid fuel rockets. That material got out of my hands because I'm not a businessman and wasn't a businessman, and freely gave it away, and other people capitalized on it. But I liked explosions, and so early on started building rockets.
There's a wonderful story that you told us yesterday that we'd love to say again very briefly. And I'm going to be using the word briefly in my questions here with an apology, because we know that you could talk with us literally for days about the extraordinary experiences you have, the things that you know, the things that you've been told, the things that you strongly believe with good reason. But one of the stories that we want you to tell is what happened one day when you were 10 years old with a bunch of adults and you had an extraordinary experience.
Well, I'll preface that just a little bit with the fact that as I was growing up, it was in a very small town, small country town, about 3 blocks long, and not a lot of people. My parents had a home that had a formal garden, and many of the local people would borrow that for weddings and family reunions and things like that, which my parents gladly lent them the facilities. And there was a wedding that went on, and as I remember, it was kind of in maybe June or July of 1950. And at that point, I had very limited educational resources in this tiny town, but one of the books that got me very, very interested in ancient peoples and anthropology and archaeology was the book that was written about the discovery of King Tut's tomb. And about the time I finished that book, it got me very, very excited to learn about the Egyptians and learn about the technologies that they had and who they were and how they built the pyramids. A lecturer came to town, the man who wrote the book Kon-Tiki, Thor Heyerdahl, and then that got me excited, so I decided I wanted to be an anthropologist, archaeologist, and was dead set on it and reading everything I could get through the state library system on that subject. And along came this wedding, and just about as the preacher was to say the words of destruction to the bride and groom, someone pointed up the sky and said, "What's that?" And everyone turned around. There were about 130 people there, and everyone turned around and looked, and for the next 2 hours, everyone at the wedding watched a series and groups of what I can only call flying saucers, flying through the air, some as close as maybe 100 feet and some as far away as maybe 20 miles, put on a spectacular show, and everyone there saw it, as did many people in the surrounding community.
Were they all the same?
No, there were very different ones. Some were the shape of a pencil and seemed to have windows along the periphery. Some were round like a ball. Some were saucer shaped with a bubble or a dome on top. Some saucer shaped with 2 or 3 bubbles on the bottom. If you go back and look through the various flying saucer sightings that we've heard about over the years, there was probably 1 or 2 of everything we've ever heard about. And these things would dash away, clear out of sight, and come back. They would run away from the people at the wedding party directly, so you were looking just at one spot.
And the significance of this is that at this point you made a major life change, right?
At this point I made a major life change. I decided I was much less interested in King Tut than I was in having my own flying saucer.
Right.
And so immediately started studying science. And so I've studied science ever since, and much of it toward the end of building my own flying saucer. And over the years I came to the conclusion that it was, to build a flying saucer, you really needed to know first how to build what I call a Doctor Who phone booth. And for those who don't know, Doctor Who is a British science fiction spoof that runs on many stations in America about 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. and there have been something like 6 or 7 different Doctor Who's over the years. It's run so long. And Doctor Who had a red British phone booth.
He didn't have a red British phone booth, he had a black police phone box. It was a police phone box.
Ah, okay.
It wasn't a red one.
All right, but he had a 2-holer British phone booth, and he would go into it and it would become a time machine.
It was called the TARDIS.
It was called the TARDIS. And so he was a Time Lord, and he would travel back and forth in both space and time. And so as I tried to figure out how to build a flying saucer, I found out it was easier to build a TARDIS. And then I got thinking, well, who wants to just shove an aerodynamic body through air when you can just simply get somewhere and dial your destination and walk out where you are, and you don't have to push anything through the air. So anyway, I worked toward that end and have done many, many science projects, some for large corporations, some for, we'll call them agencies, and many of them for myself. And I'm in the process now at age 69 of building a laboratory to complete the work that I've done, and having acquired a number of very special pieces of equipment for researching such things. And so that's what I'm about right now, and I'm in the process of building that laboratory in a remote location where there are very little man-made magnetic fields. We don't really get television or radio direct much here, and have very, very little man-made interference, electromagnetic interference, and it allows me to do my work that I need to do. And so that's the life change that happened when I was 10 years old, and so I've been on that pursuit ever since.
And we would say be careful what you wish for, because now you have the understanding, as far as you have told us in our conversation so far, you have actually the understanding, if you don't have the factory, to actually be able to make these machines. And you can also confirm that the powers that be on planet Earth actually have access to this technology and use it for all kinds of reasons. Is this correct?
As far as I can tell, there are a number of governments that have this technology. My feeling is, and or my knowledge is, that it's been acquired from people who came to this planet from off-planet. And it's been from the reading of a lot of ancient documents dating back as far as 6,000 years.
To the Sumerians?
To the Sumerians. I have a Sumerian document that's been translated that tells exactly how to build a flying saucer. And it's a direct translation. And it probably doesn't give everything, but it certainly gives the principles. And I've experimented with a number of those principles and find out that things take place that in modern physics aren't possible. And I've worked with a group of scientists that have have recently discovered things in both mathematics and science that would lead me to believe that the greater part of science that we have today, and I have a PhD degree in natural philosophy, which they used to call physics, that took a lot of effort to acquire, and it leads me to believe that these ancient documents portray knowledge that we simply don't have, and that the knowledge we do have is wrong.
And you've been privileged to spend time in the Vatican Library. Is this something you can talk about on record?
Probably, well, I can talk about things that there's a lot of information there that is very contrary to things that we believe very deeply, both philosophically and scientifically. And that's basically been held away from the public. It's not common knowledge. A lot of translations, which I think probably came from the remnants of what didn't burn in the Great Library of Alexandria. Some very ancient documents, and I was involved at a time with machine language translation of a lot of that material, which was, in those days, was somewhat crude, but at least it gave us some ideas. And the ones that looked good were later translated by people who had done, lifetime studies of the language, and I think they're pretty fair translations.
Are you able to say about anything that you learned about the Anunnaki? Or is this off record as well?
The Anunnaki, who are written about in the Christian and Jewish Bible texts, I've seen skeletons of what we call giants. There have been recent giants. There are people that would travel around with traveling circuses and so forth that were very, very large through genetic problems that they had, genetic errors, and all of them had joint problems. They had organ problems. They died young. The bodies couldn't support the weight, things like that. But some of the skeletons don't show those anomalies that one would see, and they're very well formed. They're very much like our skeletons in many respects, and they were written about in the Bible, and they were written about in other ancient texts. So one has to believe. I know that there were numerous suggestions that DNA tests be run on them once we got DNA testing pretty well down, and I know those have been thwarted by various religions and various school bodies, people not wanting to say that there are things that we don't understand, or that they don't understand, or that they don't want to understand.
But we human beings are from ET lineage, are we not?
My belief is that, I'll give you an example. Radiocarbon dating has become very, very accurate. And we have very good records of cavemen that didn't have a language. They drew some drew pictures, some didn't. We found caves with their tools in them, with the evidences of their civilization, with their making crude tools and things. And there have been a number of spots that those were found, especially in Africa and Europe and the Middle East. And then all of a sudden, over an 80-year period, emerged a civilization that for 3,000 years had the same language and the same religion and the same writing and the same mathematics. And it was very, very advanced from things that came afterwards. And, in modern history, since, let's say 300 BC, we haven't had any civilization that didn't change the language to where you couldn't read it in a 300-year period.
Yeah. Now, many of the viewers of this video will be aware of the influence on ancient Sumeria, where this fully developed civilization seemed to appear from nowhere. I was just asking whether you can confirm in any way what a lot of people suspect, which is that we actually are have been created or engineered by ETs who knew what they were doing and who wanted to create us for special purposes?
Well, I don't have absolute proof of that. That's one reason I'm building the laboratory here. But one of the things I did notice in the late 70s and early 80s, I did a lot of medical equipment engineering, and I designed a machine that would read a field that surrounded the human body and could give you a readout on the condition of the organs, organ by organ in the body, and then it could locate or find or even create a medication that would fix it. And one of the things that I found was in the early beginning that machine could pretty accurately come up with diagnosis rate of 50%. And of course I wanted it to be perfect, and spent a number of years finding out that the reason that I didn't get over 50% was because a lot of people had genetic errors in their genetic system, and as a result of that they had disease processes that were based on those genetic errors. So you had to treat them very differently as people that had a disease that was based on viri or germs or other parasites especially. And so I finally got it to where about 70 to 75% of the diagnoses appeared correct, and the selection of medication treatment appeared correct. And then I thought, well, okay, there's 15% here that I really don't understand. And it was about 10 or 15 years later that we got pretty familiar with and pretty good with genetic testing. And I found that 15% of people had very, very similar sequences in the DNA that were unlike the other 85% of the people, and they were unlike anything else on Earth. They appeared to be alien to the Earth. And so I thought, well, that could be through exposure to some form of solar radiation or some type of ionizing radiation. And so we looked at people that lived in areas that had natural radioactive compounds, like the areas in southern Utah where a lot of the carnotite and other uranium-bearing ores were mined, and people that spent time there, people that were in fallout zones of nuclear testing at the Nuclear Test Center in Nevada. We sent the Gemini capsule up, and it went up, and well, the first capsule that went up, and so we're all sitting in mission control and called up, and ground to capsule, hello, do you read us? Comes back, and there was dead silence, and then everybody laughed because we had the thing, the last guy that went to work had to be the guy that ran for lunch, and right down the street from JPL, right above the Rose Bowl, was like one of the first Jack-in-the-Boxes. And you'd drive in and you'd order, and then they'd repeat the order back, and it'd come back, you couldn't hear a word. And so everybody realized that these astronauts had taken their turn going and getting lunch, and et cetera, and everybody laughed and thought they were simulating the Jack-in-the-Box effect. It turns out that that's the best communication we had. And so immediately Chris Kraft turns to me and says, Peterson, solve this problem. So I made a thing that we eventually called the lecture laundry, and it was a device that found out why such things took place, and they still take place. We still go to drive-ins and you can't understand a darn thing. But I built some no-noise microphones, but also had a device that removed all of that problem, and we found out there are 3 narrow pass bands where all the information of speech is recorded. 2 of them record the information. 1 of them gives you the identification of the speaker. But that one passband that gives you the speaker identification has to have a variable frequency start up and drop off. And so you have a little knob on it, so you turn it on in a lecture and you turn this knob until you can hear the speaker very, very clearly, and you can hear him perfectly. And you don't hear the airplanes go over, the police cars go by, people shuffling their papers, the noise from the cooling fan, the noise from the rear projection fan, etc., etc., etc. So anyway, one of the little things out of my life. But I used to build those, and when I moved to build my new laboratory 9 years ago, I quit building those. So that's one of the products I intend to put back in production. I checked to see why I couldn't get the final 15% of the diagnostic readings correct, and finally came to the conclusion that it was because these people had DNA that was had come from off planet, and that led me to think, well, if that's the case, there must be some kind of historical record. And when I went back and looked at the historical record, I found out that there are numerous records and numerous archaeological evidence that we were visited by people from off planet. And very probably, in my opinion, not only off planet, but extraterrestrial or extra solar system type of visitors. And you know, there's so many different people that claim having seen such things, that they existed, seen such peoples. There are several broad categories of such aliens. A small percentage of those could be attributed to anything from paranoia to just tall tales or whatever. But when you have as many as there are, all the way down through all of recorded history, leads one to believe that it probably was very, very true that such things existed. And as an example, anyone who wants to find something from the past, read Ezekiel in the Bible.
Yeah. In the course of your work, have you encountered any documentation about the existence of our relationship with creatures like this?
I have. Most of them I can't talk about.
Sure.
But yes, I've seen things written by scientists that I have very high respect for. Some were teachers of mine. Some were people that I worked with scientifically in other fields. And there were casual conversations about such things. And that's why I have the beliefs that I have, that that we have extraterrestrial DNA in our bodies, and some of us do. It's rather interesting to note that there's been a lot of supposition about various programs to reprogram people's minds, to throw their thinking off, to cause them to believe things that aren't necessarily true, but politically would be a very good thing for those in politics and in government and in religion. And it's interesting to note that mind control techniques work on 85% of the people. And the 15% that they don't work well on are people that have that particular DNA string.
Okay.
So another, you know, just another verification that those people are very different from the average person.
Pete, I'm sure we're going to have tons of people wanting to know, of this 15% DNA category, is it all one type of person, like one race, or are they distributed throughout the population? And if you can't tell us, you can't tell us.
No, they obviously run in family trees, along family tree lines or family lines, but they're pretty well distributed throughout all different cultures and races.
Thank you. I thought that was the case.
And which again would be, to me, a confirmation that they probably did happen, because why would someone come and select just one one race or one family line.
So this is black and white and
Right.
red and Amerindian
Red and yellow
everything.
and
Okay.
green and blue and whatever.
Yep.
How about your DNA? Are you one of those?
Far as I know, I am.
We probably all are in this room.
And we probably all are in this room. As
Yeah.
a matter of fact, I've found that as the last 10 or 12 years have progressed, I've noticed that many people, when I talk to about things that I know that are a fact in both science, mathematics, and in history, as well as in my belief system, I talk to certain people, and the 85% that I don't seem to have a medical problem with, i.e. the ones that have quote-unquote normal human DNA,
I don't seem to understand what you're talking about.
when I talk to them, it used to be that they would call me crazy, or it used to be that they'd be more really interested and want to learn about it. But nowadays,